is the war on drugs, which is a war on people of color, which is a huge government program that interferes with everybody, ruins lives, and destroys black
big
families.
Government. That's big
right.
government, not small government.
Right.
So that's an anti-Republican idea, but yet the Republicans are the ones supporting it.
Well, it's an anti-conservative idea, and that's why conservatives, like one of the founders of the conservative movement, William F. Buckley, opposed it. And also Barry Goldwater, of course, who was a founder of the conservative movement in this country. Goldwater also, of course, wanted homosexuals left alone and didn't want government interfering in their lives. But the right-wing Republicans, Karl Rove, enacted anti-gay laws in states all across this nation. So in many states, gay employees are losing domestic partnership benefits. And of course, one other area in which the right-wing Republicans are imposing federal government is erotica. And again, they say they're for free press and letting people run their own lives and have their own responsibility, but they want to have a right-wing theocracy, a right-wing police state, governed with police intimidation. That's their dream. As George W. Bush himself said one time, and this was captured in the movie Fahrenheit 9/11 by Michael Moore, I think the United States might be well off with a dictatorship. With me as dictator, of course.
That was George Bush.
George W. Bush. Did I say George W. Bush? Yes,
Yeah.
George W. Bush said that. Yeah. George W. Bush also said he appeared at he let the truth come out where he's at a fundraiser. It was, I don't know, a $25,000 a plate dinner or something. And he said, now I'm speaking to my true constituency. The haves and the have-mores. So, for once he was truthful, but you never see these clips appearing in the media. You never see these things repeated over and over and over and over and over, the way they repeat Barack Obama using that analogy of the pig with lipstick, which had nothing to do with Sarah Palin, but they repeat that over and over and over again. But the George W. Bush quotes that convict him of his vicious and evil agenda never show up on television. And it's pretty upsetting for us.
Well, I think that's because of the corporate consolidation of television media. There are now 6 corporations in control of all of the mainstream television media. So if you want the truth, you have to go to places like truthout.org, which collect news stories from newspapers. And of course, newspapers are a dying breed. Didn't Carter say something that they were trying to essentially construct like an American, what was the word he used? Like they wanted an American theocracy, but he was comparing it to the Middle East. I forget the term.
That's right. But he did compare what's going on in this country.
Carter.
Yes, President Carter did compare what's going on in this country. I believe it was in 2005, in one of his books, I think, where he's and I remember the interview with Tim Russert, when Tim Russert had that hour-long talk show on CNBC on Saturdays.
Late Tim Russert.
Yep. And in that, Carter said that Bush is trying to set up, Carter says that George W. Bush is setting up a regime similar to that of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini.
That's what former President Jimmy Carter said.
Jimmy Carter said that.
Arguably, the last president we had with full moral integrity. Clinton was somewhat compromised, although we both were fond of remain fond of the Clintons. They did bend over a little bit too much for the right wing. That may be the way they survived and remained in politics. But Carter did not do that. Carter stood up to the right wing. Unfortunately, and I was a very young child at the time, Carter was defeated with the October surprise, which is something you don't hear about on television either. So there are a lot of issues, I think, that we could bring to the forefront in a personal or semi-professional weblog, video blog, or even audio clips to be put online. I know there are a lot of other people doing it now, and I'm very impressed with what's available on YouTube. Not just the comedy like the Fred series that the younger people are watching, but also the more serious videos of Amy Goodman, who I mentioned earlier, of Democracy Now! You wouldn't have that video of her arrest if it had not been put on YouTube. And by the way, I have yet to see CNN air that video, or MSNBC. I certainly have not heard, if they have mentioned it, I haven't heard it, which means they're not mentioning it enough. And I think that's because there's a dividing line between someone like Amy Goodman and Democracy Now! And these independent web journalists who they're trying to shut out of the conventions, Democrats and Republicans alike, although at the Republican convention it was done in a violent fashion. But there's a dividing line between them and the corporate media. I guess to truly remain in the corporate media, most people have had to mute their opinions. There are very few exceptions. Keith Olbermann is an exception of MSNBC.
I'll give a key example of that. When George W. Bush had his run-up to the Iraq War and then invaded a nation that never attacked us, that never did anything to the United States, Dan Rather said, "Today, I know I'm a journalist and I'm supposed to be objective, but today I stand with my president." And of course that did him a lot of good next year when the right wing arranged to have him destroyed, toppled at CBS. And of course that involved the story on the National Guard. Now I personally was in the National Guard, and I know that when you sign up for the National Guard, including back in that era, you had to serve for 6 years. There was no getting out early. And yet somehow the media report this concocted story that George W. Bush was allowed out after 4 years so he could go to Harvard Business School. Well, they didn't let you out for any reason. They didn't shorten that 6-year stint for any reason. And obviously that didn't happen. Obviously he was AWOL for the last several years, and all those records were suppressed, and apparently a phony document was created to trip Dan Rather. The story that Dan had was true,
but the document
was fake. And that's what tripped him up, and the right-wing Republicans used that to topple him at CBS, which is pretty scary, because now you have the right-wing Republicans dictating who will and will not be a news anchor on American television.
Well, certainly we're not mainstream news anchors by any stretch of the imagination, although Michael has had a lengthy career in journalism and radio, from which he is now retired. But it's sad to see how many people are leaving the business, and it's happening in Canada too. They are shedding jobs by the thousands, if not more, and have been for several years, at least since 2005, I believe. I think that's being done not just to make a corporate profit, but I think to dumb down the coverage and get rid of anyone who does not toe the line, so to speak. So the internet is really democracy's last best hope. Sites like democracynow.org, truthout.org, moveon.org, who is responsible for this Obama bumper sticker. You can probably still get one from them.
And of course